Thank you, Rosalind. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. This is an interesting arrangement of tables. I see a series of heads down that way, so I hope they're going to be nodding up and down instead of sideways as we progress here. Small enough group that I would kind of prefer that if you have a burning question, you ask it. Just raise your hand and we'll try to provide the answer. This is a 30,000-foot overview. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Gordon Dorsey. He's the VP of Strategy and Commercialization for Freight Shuttle International. The hallmark of Freight Shuttle International is that it's privately financed, and our goal is to build, operate, maintain a privately financed, privately operated system as an alternative to over-the-road trucking in locations where congestion is just rendering traditional modes ineffective, uneconomic, and we appeal to the shipper principally because we are reducing cost. The cornerstone development of the freight shuttle system in all facets, the propulsion system we've selected, the energy that we choose to use, the fact that it is an autonomous guided vehicle is all geared towards the principal need to enter a marketplace with a lower cost than the prevailing rates. And I think if anybody in the room follows logistics, shipping, goods movement, rates have been moving upward over the last several decades, and when you run into high levels of congestion in key corridors, it drives those costs even higher. The cost of delay is astronomical in the country. So Freight Shuttle has been under development for 10 to 12 years. The last 2 or 3 years we've been prototyping a full-scale working prototype at our facility close to Texas A&M and College Station. We're actually in Bryan. It's a private facility, 34-acre facility where we're doing test and evaluation work. And I'll run through some high-level concepts here and encourage you again to ask questions. There's a lot of layers to the onion. Transportation is a complex topic. Not only is it a systems-oriented topic, but it deals with politics and economics and environment, and all of these related areas have to be addressed if you're moving into a marketplace, have to be addressed and addressed effectively for you to be able to gain entry into the marketplace that you seek. So question is then, why this? Why now? Every 3 to 5 years, the American Society of Civil Engineering does a report card on infrastructure. This is drawn from, I believe, the 2013 report. Another one is due out. It provides a grading by civil engineering of all the various aspects of infrastructure: water, road, rail, bridges, down the line. And we're getting increasingly lower grades as time passes. This report card in 2013 gave the aggregate a D+, and they identified a need of something over $3.6 trillion in unmet cost to bring infrastructure up to the point that it needs to be. It's a very dismal, and frankly, for anybody who is my age, has kids and grandkids, this is not what we want to bequeath to our next generation, which is a completely trash infrastructure in all the forms that I've just been talking about. We've got to do something different. Now, you're hearing a lot out of the Trump administration about infrastructure programs. I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what form that takes. It could be good in a number of ways, and we're certainly hopeful that it's positive for Freight Shuttle. Give you sort of a mental image. Now, my administrative assistant told me she hates this slide, but I left it in anyway. The idea of the Freight Shuttle is that it's a rolling conveyor for freight. We use single unit autonomous transporters to move cargo from point A to point B along an elevated guideway. This graphic might give you a little better notion. This is dated. It's probably 4 or 5 years old, and we actually have a working one now, you'll see in a moment. But the idea is a bidirectional elevated system with automated vehicles moving either one ISO container, like you see out of the Port of Houston, or one over-the-road truck trailer, like you see on I-10 and I-35 and I-45 in some significant numbers. In 2005, I formed Freight Shuttle International and became the exclusive licensee from the Texas A&M University system of the intellectual property that I developed while at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. We remain that exclusive licensee. We built up a patent portfolio of some 17 patents worldwide, dealing with various facets of the freight shuttle technology. That's on top of the fact that we tried in the design and development phases to rely on known and understood technologies. We didn't want to invent something radically new. We knew the technologies existed out there, like steel wheels and steel running surfaces, that the rail industry has used successfully for centuries to reduce the rolling resistance and the energy required to move a load down their infrastructure. We included steel wheels and a steel running surface on our system for the very same reason. We want energy efficiency, and we think we've achieved it. This is a view of what the system is coming together to look like. This is an artist rendering. That vehicle on the guideway closely resembles the real version that you can see in Bryan. It's bidirectional. It's on a segmental bridge. This is a prefabricated bridge structure that is formed off-site and erected on the site. It's essentially concrete Legos, if you will. It is an inexpensive solution. Aesthetically, it can be created to provide a very pleasing visual view of the infrastructure that we're putting in place. Highly adaptable, very flexible in negotiating conflict points on rights of way, and we can talk more about that as we move through. Everyone knows what challenges we're facing, and this is a list that I don't want to belabor too much, but there's a difference in perception between goods movement professionals, shippers, and the public, and we've tried to sort of break this list out by public versus private concerns. Congestion is for the private shipper or the trucking company an issue of managing uncertainty. There's two things in goods movement that are very, very important. One is cost. Cargo moves along the path defined by the lowest cost possible. The other is reliability of the shipment, uncertainties associated with delivery time, and how that permeates the system and creates cost downstream from where that unreliability, lack of reliability occurs. Highway safety versus risk management. Trucking companies, as good corporate citizens, are going to be concerned about highway safety, but from their perspective, it becomes a very expensive insurance issue. Risk management is a part of their daily life, and they have to deal with it economically. Infrastructure deterioration. Trucks are both the victim and, to a large measure, the cause of infrastructure deterioration. I think the ratio between a fully loaded 80,000-pound truck and a single automobile is on the order of 9,600 to 1. That is, one 80,000-pound truck does the damage to the infrastructure that 9,600 normally loaded automobiles do. Energy cost and availability, capacity, and the need for greater productivity. Trucking companies always want heavier loads, longer trucks, and there's a battle between the DOTs and the railroads and the trucking industries that we see repeated year after year, and it's going to be repeated again this year. Air quality is an issue. Again, the 18-wheelers that we see on our highways, these diesel, heavy-duty diesel trucks, are the bad actors in mobile emissions. We address that through an all-electric system with zero emission at the point of use. And a lot of people don't know it, but there's a chronic driver shortage in the trucking industry. They're projecting something on the order of 100 to 200,000 drivers short over the next decade. They can't fill the seats, and on the back of almost every 18-wheeler you see, there's a sign for we're hiring drivers. And that's going to remain a chronic problem for the foreseeable future. So the autonomous freight shuttle, it's a hybrid system. We got to cherry pick in the design process the best features of trucking, the best features of railroad, and combine those. I've already mentioned steel on steel. We were also inspired by the trucking industry to rely on single unit transporters, that is one load per vehicle. We can decongest our terminals very rapidly with this strategy, and no load waits on any subsequent loads, and so we can have smaller, more efficient terminals and provide the customer service that we seek to achieve. We had to select a propulsion system, and we selected after a careful analysis linear induction motors to serve as our propulsion system, and we did it for several different reasons. Principal among them is it's a completely passive propulsion system. That is, there are no moving parts on the vehicle, save the wheels and the wheel bearings that support the load. But the propulsion itself comes through the interaction of that motor that's on board and a reaction plate that is built into the guideway. Other than that, it's completely passive, so there are no parts to wear out and fail. Talked a little bit about the elevated guideway and the benefit that that gets us. We're able to negotiate points of conflict. We're able to be up above the existing traffic. And the goal of Freight Shuttle is to co-locate on existing highway rights-of-way in the airspace above active traffic lanes. And we're successful in achieving that on the I-35 corridor with a reservation of right-of-way agreement from TxDOT that was awarded in 2012 that allowed us to build that system. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit and weren't quite ready to begin construction, but the model is in place, and it's been embellished through the FAST Act that was passed last year in Washington, D.C. The other benefit of an autonomous automated system is we are not under hours of service limitations like trucking and railroads. We can operate 24/7 around the clock because there's no onboard driver. That gives us an advantage in terms of moving cargo. This too is an old animation, but it communicates the point. We move the boxes with an overhead crane, but we've built a very novel rotating cargo bay that allows a truck trailer to be extracted and another one driven on very rapidly with a very low error rate. That upper deck of the cargo bay is rotated back in alignment with the vehicle, and it's out the terminal. Our current prototype has this rotating cargo bay. I'll be able to point that out to you in a moment. We feel like it's a very effective way to get trailers on board because they've taken so much weight out of the trailer, you can't really pick it up with a crane. You don't know where it'll bend. It might bend in the middle, it might bend at the ends, but typically they're so lightweight that best way to do it is drive it on and drive it off. Here's a view of the segmental bridge. This allows for extra long spans between your columns. You can determine what height you want this system to be, whether it's 20 feet or 25. You can take out some of the undulations in the terrain below by varying your column heights and getting a smooth operating surface. Perhaps most importantly for us is the hollow section that you see in the segments gives us an ideal place for our power distribution and our communications, and we're actually designing a substation that will fit inside that hollow space and be off the right-of-way, out of the weather, away from harm's way. It gives us a tremendous leg up in terms of operations and security. The other really beautiful thing about this precast bridge design, these concrete Legos, is you can affect most of the construction from the deck of the bridge itself. Our partner, and you see their logo in the lower left corner, is Fig Bridge Engineering out of Tallahassee, Florida. They pioneered this technology and have affected this particular strategy in a couple of noteworthy places. One is at JFK Airport for their SkyTrain people mover, which they built above the Van Wyck Expressway, which carries 160,000 cars a day. And bottom line, it eliminates the need for orange barrels and traffic control and interruptions. And you saw the yellow truss system that is moved forward as construction progresses and allows you to rapidly construct a relatively low-cost system. This asset, according to FIG, has a minimum of a 75-year active life as an asset. We decided at Freight Shuttle that the only way to build our prototype was to self-perform. So we set up a fabrication facility down by NASA in Webster and built the system down there over the last year and a half. It's an all-aluminum system. You see some of the fabrication work taking place from 2016 or late 2015. This allowed us to go directly from the CAD design for a part to a plasma cutting machine to a welder, and it cut out weeks and weeks and thousands of dollars in expense. Here's a picture of the linear induction motor. It's the box there that's identified as being 7 feet long. The key engineering element here is that air gap of 5/8 of an inch. The linear motor hovers above a carbon steel reaction plate that is a passive part of the guideway system. And when you energize the linear motor, it creates a magnetic field in that reaction plate that tries to repel the vehicle forward or reverse, depending on your instructions to it. So that magnetic field, it's essentially fun with magnets. You're able to move that vehicle along at ever-increasing velocities with a high level of control, no moving parts, and no contact between the vehicle and the guideway element that we're talking about. We chose in our design to eliminate the flange on the steel wheel. Railroads have a flange. Railroads depend on the wheel and the rail to keep the vehicle on the track, and I think everyone's aware that railroads have derailments on occasion. We had to design a derailment-proof system, highly resistant to derailments, so we eliminated all the functionality of the wheels in this system. They simply bear the weight and roll when told to by some outside influence, the linear motor in this case. So the wheel simply rolls along a flat steel running surface. We don't depend on the wheels for propulsion, for braking, for guidance, or to keep the vehicle on the guideway. We have a center element that I may have a picture of. We have a center element in our guideway that's included in this reaction plate that's the center view here that creates an interlock between the vehicle and the guideway so that it can't come up off the guideway. So when we're operating on an elevated system above active traffic lanes, we'll be highly, highly unlikely to come off that guideway. We also had the luxury in the design process of determining what wheel gauge we wanted. Railroads have been stuck for centuries with 4 feet 8.5 inches between wheels. It's about like that. And for a double stack intermodal train on a footing that's 4 feet 8.5 inches, you have lateral stability issues. And we didn't want that with our system, so we expanded the wheelbase, not arbitrarily, but based on the engineering requirements, up to 96 inches. So we've got a much wider footprint and a lot more lateral stability. I wanted to show you some of the components. Is that not coming through? It's coming through over here. Oh, there we go. This is a little animation that shows the aluminum elements that we designed and put in place here to create a freight shuttle system. And I didn't realize we were going to have the dramatic music, but that's just a nice touch. There's the upper rotating cargo deck. You see the linear motor down here at the bottom. This is a bidirectional system. The two tractors on either end of this system are identical, with communications and propulsion on both ends. This weighs 1/3 as much as if we had built it from steel. This is a fully aluminum vehicle. Really, the only steel components are the steel wheels. This vehicle is designed to carry 70,000 pounds at 70 miles an hour, and it moves as readily in reverse as it does in forward, and we have applications for that in certain terminal types, like a seaport setting where real estate is very scarce, very valuable. We'll move in one direction and stop, take a load, and move out in the opposite direction, so we're not having to turn the vehicle around within or above the confines of the port environment. This is a view of our Alpha system. This is the first one we built. You can see the symmetry of the system. You can also see the upper rotating deck below the HEB trailer. I believe there's our test site from some months back. Our current phase is in orange. We've got 900 feet of linear guideway. Phase 2 coming up in 2017 will be a half-mile loop where we'll be able to operate at higher speeds and operate over long periods of time to test the heating and wear of components. Ultimately, we may go to a full mile loop on this facility that's elevated or partially elevated. Jury's still out on that. And here's an operational view of the Alpha system coming out of its hangar. Freight shuttle does not seek to be all things to all people. We're an intermodal carrier. We want to move containerized cargo. We want to focus on highly congested locations, be it a port environment or a landside port of entry could facilitate international trade. We also want to address the intermediate and the short and intermediate distance market. This graphic here, this histogram, shows the quantity of cargo moved by distance. And you can see the graphic says 80% of the freight moves less than 750 miles. We really see the freight shuttle operating in the 500-mile and lower ranges. Our early systems are going to be even shorter than that. The other noteworthy thing about this graphic is railroads are a long-haul option, probably the best long-haul option for certain commodities. Typically will not move cargo if it's not going at least 500 miles. You can argue about the number. I've heard 750, but 500 is a good round number. We operate below that, so we're end-to-end compatible with the railroads. That red, I guess, is virtually 100% intercity trucking. We have a Seaport Express model that essentially uses our capabilities to pick up boxes in a confined, congested setting and move them out to an inland facility some distance away from congestion, beyond congestion, so logistics is easier for the carrier, for the shipper, for the trucker, and it has the added benefit of decongesting the port. So when we have these larger and larger vessels come in with greater quantities of containers, the surge in that traffic can completely gridlock an environment, and the freight shuttle as an option is a way to immediately move that to an inland facility some distance away. The opposite can be true. We can pick up from customer locations, and since we've got a 70,000 pound load, we can operate as a heavy haul corridor back to the port and keep the heavy hauls off the highway, which it proves everywhere to be a challenge. This is an option that obviates the need to do that. Our sister business model is what we call the CrossBorder Express. We've worked for years in El Paso, Juarez, between the US and Mexico. The difference between the two models is somewhat minor, but I think well represented by this graphic. We operate between two secure facilities, and between those two secure facilities, we have the elevated guideway system and the automated vehicles operating in its conveyor belt-like fashion. This gives US CBP and its counterpart, Mexican Aduanas, the ability to X-ray scan 100% of the cargo moving both north and south, significantly elevating the security. And furthermore, we do not move the tractor and we do not move the driver. And in CBP's estimation, that removes 2/3 of the vulnerability. So we have a much more highly secure strategy. This can be 5 miles away from the border, it could be 10 miles away from the border, but again, you locate these facilities in more logistically favorable locations, and you've done a lot to decongest the international bridges, which in environments like El Paso, Juarez, are serving to clamp down on economic development. The maquiladora model in El Paso, Juarez is dependent on just-in-time shipping, and if you can't get across the bridges, you can't really keep this economic engine operating at the levels that it would like to operate at. Here's some comparisons of the freight shuttle versus heavy-duty diesel trucks. The NOx generated, we did an evaluation on I-35 for our TxDOT proposal a couple of years ago. We produced 2.35% of the NOx generated by heavy-duty diesel trucks. And the NOx we generate are reflected by the power plants that are providing us electricity. We're a very low energy user. We operate at 36% of the cruise energy per VMT of a heavy-duty diesel truck, in large measure because of the efficiency of the motor, but also those steel wheels that we were talking about earlier. The aerodynamics of the system don't hurt, and the 36% that we do use is less costly energy than diesel, so we've got kind of a double win here. Our business model is pretty simple. Freight Shuttle International operates as a licensing entity, and we identify ownership consortia, private investors, pension funds, high net worth individuals to invest the equity to build a system. They become the beneficial owner of that system, and their expectation is a return on investment. We're moving cargo for a cost. The key distinction is that we're a lower cost option than what's currently out there. We're cost deductive, we're not cost additive. We provide the shipper then for that transportation fee higher performance, higher predictable system so that they can take other costs out of their supply chain. The DOT leases us airspace above the highway right-of-way, and so they're monetizing what's currently a fallow, non-performing asset that just takes money to keep it healthy. We pay a lease fee to the DOT and don't conflict with other DOT plans for expansion and maintenance. And then a host of benefits flows to the public sector or the customers based on this. Reduced road maintenance, improved safety, cleaner air. You can read the list for yourself. We think it's a very solid model. We think we've been able to enhance that model through our work in Washington over the last couple of years in the FAST Act. We worked with a legislative strategist in DC to define a new mode of transportation, and it's called the Intelligent Freight Transportation System. It's an innovative system, and it includes elevated freight transportation facilities, electronic roads, driverless trucks. And the key part of this FAST Act work is that this new mode of transportation is defined as an augmentation of the National Highway System and falls under the regulatory auspices of the Federal Highway Administration. It looks a little bit to the casual observer like a rail system. We wanted to make sure that it was identified as a highway system, and we're successful in getting this in Title 23 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, and the regulatory oversight for an intelligent freight transportation system falls under the administrator of FHWA. Very big win for us, a big facilitator for us. It further defines one of these systems. If it links from a port of entry to a federal aid highway, it's defined as a federal aid highway project and eligible for federal aid highway reimbursement. That is a big deal because the state could participate and receive up to 90% reimbursement for the cost of a system like this under federal aid highway regulations, rules and regulations. So we think this has positioned us very well. We obviously have a wild card in the deck beginning last week. We're waiting to see how the Trump administration really rolls out their transportation planning. Big ideas about infrastructure. This is infrastructure. Big ideas about privatization of activities. This is private. We're hopeful that this turn of events can really propel us forward in a way that perhaps another administration might not have. So what that does, the FAST Act really adds an element to our business model by making a very robust and rich environment for public-private partnerships, because now the DOT can participate directly under the Federal Aid Highway Act, and Congress apportioned $6.3 billion in the FAST Act for use on these projects. So Texas, I don't know what Texas' share of that apportioned money was, but there are dollars out there that can be brought to bear on these projects by TxDOT, FHWA, and other partners that we would be working with. Last year in September, we began a dialogue with the Port of Houston about essentially the Seaport Express model and the idea that future vision, growth in the Port of Houston, continued population growth, need for export avenues, and increasing amounts of cargo coming in their container facilities might warrant a look at an inland facility and how that might work. So we're in the initial phases of planning a project with the Port of Houston to define a feasibility study, outreach to government, commercial, community stakeholders to understand what the issues and concerns are, look at the commercial activity, the projected growth at the Port of Houston, and we're making good progress with our partners after signing a MOU with the Port in September. The project will undoubtedly be considered in phases. First phase could be the connection of Bayport to Barber's Cut with a pilot project that moves cargo between those two container facilities and gives Bayport the ability to ship by rail. So the freight shuttle could pick up the box at Bayport, take it up to the intermodal ramp at Barber's Cut, and essentially provide the customer coming in or going out with rail connection at that second container terminal. The real goal, and I talked to senior folks at the Port of Houston, is to facilitate economic growth in Houston, the city, the region, reduce emissions that are always a problem around port environments because of the dray fleets that move in and out to pick up cargo. We essentially, the way things have developed in our port world, we essentially try to do everything in one very constricted location. And this is a strategy that would allow us to disperse the activities in a more effective way. And improve safety is always an issue, and we think the freight shuttle will be a highly efficient, highly safe system. So with that, I think I'd be happy to answer a few questions if you have some. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about this being a private and privately funded. Then just at the end here, you started getting into public funding through FHWA, possibly TxDOT, and whatever. And I guess I'm seeing two different messages there, and I'm not sure the compatibility, or at least political issues. If this is a private function, then why public funding being proposed to be sought?
It's a very good question. Frankly, we do not know the direction that this will go. There are some entities that might seek in a less than vibrant economic environment to augment the finances to build a system with some public funding. Our centerpiece at Freight Shuttle International remains private funding, private financing. And the fact that the FAST Act happened when it did and went well beyond what our goals were with that legislation has just created an opportunity. I don't know how that'll be used, where that'll be used, if it will be used, but we will endeavor to focus on our private financing strategy whenever possible. We think that's a better way to go, but we've just been presented with a little different wrinkle in the law. It's a good question, but we just don't know how that'll develop. Another question over here?
What's your switching technology? I imagine you would have some tracks like the job to other locations. You don't have plain wheels.
Correct, yeah. Our switching technology, in simple terms, takes the center element that provides guidance, propulsion, power, and moves it half the width of the vehicle to a new alignment hydraulically so that you change your alignment. So it's a movable component in the guideway.
You said that the vehicles very, very, very rarely fall off the track. Can you be any more emphatic than that to say that?
Never. It would never come off the track. It's designed. We have several countermeasures, and I didn't want to bore you with the techie end of all of this, but we have brake calipers that surround the reaction plate and use that as a braking surface. So those brake calipers are there to create a barrier to overturning. We also have a guidance system underneath the vehicle that guides it in terms of its linear turning that is also built in a way that will not allow the vehicle to come up off of the guideway. You have to, when you're putting one of these vehicles on the guideway, you essentially have to thread it on from the end. And once it's on, unless you make some other provision, it's not coming off.
Is that technology being used before? Is this before required?
Various kinds of interlocking technologies have been used. You can see people movers that have strategies with rubber tires that are oriented in multiple different planes. We designed ours beginning with a blank piece of paper to be maintainable, to be cost effective, and most importantly, to give us the highest level of assurance that these vehicles are staying where we put them. Yes?
I have a question. I'm interested in how the business model would work for freight coming through the port and going to all the origins and destinations today, where either imports or exports terminate if you go away from the port. Is the idea that you have, I don't know, hundreds of different destinations across, say, Harris County, Chambers County, Fort Wayne County, where industry is around Houston today? Or do you envision moving all these manufacturing sources to a single location? Or do you still have trucks, as many trucks moving to the central location, just they're going a shorter distance? What's the optimum model or your business model for that scenario?
Did everyone hear the question? Well, let me repeat to the extent that I can. The question is, do we deliver to a multiplicity of locations around the Houston area through freight shuttle terminals, or do we rely on trucks in their last mile role to transit from their facility to a freight shuttle terminal, and the benefit is it's less congested and it's a shorter distance? Or a third option, which is to provide a location where manufacturers can physically move closer to a freight shuttle facility. I think the answer initially is that we are going to select locations that are logistically more favorable and rely on last mile trucking to serve as the linkage between manufacturing and the freight shuttle system. Over time, if we provide the appropriate real estate, some companies could locate more proximate to a freight shuttle facility so that they have the added benefit of being right there. And yet, over time, we could envision a number of dispersed freight shuttle facilities that further improve the logistics by broadening our network in an optimal way. We're certainly not going to deliver to every location that is a customer. We'll just have to see how that evolves. The initial idea is one inland facility for the Port of Houston, for instance. On the CrossBorder system, it's 2 dedicated facilities, and we would expect trucking then to circulate domestically, not have to deal with the international bridge and clearance and customs, but just operate domestically and get many, many more turns. I wish Bruce hadn't left quite so soon. I was going to ask him what the average delay is at the Port of Houston. We know in El Paso, dray trucks at the international bridges will spend 90 minutes in traffic each direction to go to the U.S. and pick up a box and take it back to Mexico, which reduces their economic efficiency to something under 2 turns a day. Our modeling suggests that they can get somewhere between 8 and 12 a day by circulating domestically with a freight shuttle facility in country. Larry.
Another thing that I haven't heard you say that I know is very important is the railroads. Just still will be able to implement and work with the railroad system that we have and get it to be further in or to your port to go from there.
Yeah, we think interfacing with the railroads effectively to transfer cargo is a natural function that will occur. We have plans that show that we can automate the staging, loading and unloading of double stack intermodal trains. with a freight shuttle that would double the throughput of their facilities. The railroads are interested in what we're doing. They're not quite sure what to make of us. I think they believe we're not a threat because of the distances that we operate. And so we've had some productive dialogues, particularly with some East Coast railroads. Gordon met recently with CSX and Florida East Coast Railroad, and they're embracing this as a way to more effectively interact with ports themselves. Yes, sir.
Going back to, I guess, one of your original premises, that the current truck-based transfer of container freight and arguably other freights is adversely affected by congestion on the roads. Unless I'm mistaken, and I often am, there's an awful lot of capacity on the roads that's underutilized by the shippers. And I'm missing something of why, if this is a significant bearing on cost, why the shippers, as well as the people who do the shipping, don't change their model and operate when there's all that underutilized capacity on the highways, namely at night. Am I missing something? I know the port doesn't allow container traffic into the port outside of normal business hours. I don't know that there's any physical reason why that couldn't be changed. There are probably other warehousing and large shippers, the same issues apply. So I'm somewhat bemused by the apparent current inability of shippers and shipping agents to alter their modes of operation to utilize the underutilized capacity on the existing roads and highway systems.
I think a lot of that goes on. I think the goods movement industry is always adjusting, trying to optimize and use space, use time, use their expenses to the best of their ability. And we're not saying that congestion is the sole driver of the cost equation here, but it's one factor. You've got a list of costs that are not going down for the trucking industry, including insurance. The cost of drivers is going up. Fuel is a big part of it. So it's a complex of costs that we feel like we can address, particularly in congested locations where you've got a natural customer base waiting for you to operate. And if you look at a port, you're doing everything in one small location. You're bringing in thousands of boxes, and within a few hundred yards, you're bringing in thousands of trucks one at a time to get those boxes. This is a better way to do that, and we believe that ports will embrace this as a way to decongest their facilities. Building additional container facilities on expensive real estate is a daunting prospect for almost every port. We give a port the ability to expand their terminal capacities with almost infinitely by going inland to cheaper property and being able to express that cargo to that lower cost property with better logistics than what they're currently operating at. Yes, ma'am.
This is a very interesting project. I've heard about it, but I didn't really know what it was. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
But I have a question. As you're talking about these very powerful magnets, could you speak to any side effects that level of magnetism would have on other systems, communication, or anything else?
Negligible. It's very localized. It's within our reaction plate. Actually, it looks a lot like the table that you're sitting in front of. And so the magnetic field that is set up in that reaction plate exists in about the middle 16 or 18 inches of that plate, and it's a temporary, transient magnetic field that goes away very rapidly. So the magnetism just goes away, and as you move along, you're continuing to set up a magnetic field to repel your vehicle. So there's no detrimental effects to the cargo or people on the ground or people in proximate location. Yes?
Steve, I know that you've been talking to the port about the demonstration project going between Barber's Cut and their other terminal. And in my mind, I keep thinking about where the trucks, they're loading up and where they're really going to. And I don't know that there's that much interaction between the two terminals. And then I also heard you say you weren't interested, at least initially, in going to like a warehouse, a particular customer. But have you considered looking at areas where there's some very large warehouses that are clustered very close together? Because to me, that would make more sense than going so much between the two port terminals.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. The next phase of our work with the Port of Houston will be a feasibility study to investigate in detail just that kind of thing that you're bringing up. That makes a lot of sense, and there are some mega warehousing locations, not to mention very key industries that are shipping that we might want to get proximate to. And I'm not saying we cannot do that. I just think it deserves a lot of study and evaluation to be able to do it effectively both for Freight Shuttle and the customer. You're absolutely right, though. Yes, sir.
Steve, the technology that you're talking about is very similar to the high-speed rail technology called magnetic levitation, or maglev. Is it the same?
We're mag without the lev. From an economic standpoint, goods movement is a cost minimizing industry. Nobody wants to pay a premium to, air condition your beanbag chairs. So it's all about reducing the cost. And in our assessment, levitating cargo is far more expensive than necessary. So we made the decision early on to use steel wheels. It gives you almost the same rolling resistance numbers, certainly well within our economic needs and economic modeling, without the exotic technologies. I mean, there's lots of ways to say it. Does it make sense to spend millions to levitate cheap plastic items from China? It just doesn't, right? So most cargo falls into that category. The propulsion portion of our system with the linear induction motors can be very similar to what's used in maglev systems. But we're trying to drive the cost of our system down to $10 or $12 million a mile. Magnetic levitation systems, because, and this is a detail that probably doesn't bear going into, in a maglev system, oftentimes the guideway is the motor. Now we put the motor on our vehicle. We kind of reversed it. They have a smart guideway, dumb vehicle. We have a smart vehicle, dumb guideway. And we did that for economic reasons. So we're able to avoid the $100 million a mile cost associated with maglev systems. You could never do a privately financed system if your infrastructure was $100 million a mile. It's just a non-starter. So we moved away from that from day one.
A follow-up on that, then, the steel wheel, the steel rail, of course, is a noise producer. I live near Hardy Toll Road, and I hear the trains all the time. Do you have anything on quieting the steel wheel to steel rail noise?
I do. I want to go back to a graphic that maybe helps us here a little bit. One of these early, excuse me for doing this. This one. The segmental bridge has a wing that you can see that covers up the lower portion of the vehicle. And that wing stands about 3 feet high on either side of the guideway. That produces, for those below, it produces a sound shadow that sends any sound signature that we're talking about up and not down. The other component is a lot of the noise associated with railroad wheels deals with the interaction of the flange and the head of the rail. So that rubbing motion that you get from a flange wheel on a traditional rail accounts for more than half of the noise signature from traditional railroads. We've eliminated that. Now, there's some other things that can be done, and when we move towards a fuller service kind of operation, we'll be looking at sound canceling technologies. But we'll also be very careful in measuring what kind of decibels reach people on the ground and over what distance. We think our system's going to be pretty quiet. Yes, sir.
You said that the basic component there is the linear induction motor on the vehicle.
Yes, sir.
In the proverbial, when stuff happens, if that motor has a problem, then are these vehicles have enough power to push vehicles down the road?
Excellent question. This vehicle is fully redundant. There are propulsion systems and electronics in both ends of the vehicle. So we've distributed our power between the two tractor units. Should one fail, you've still got communications and power capabilities in the leading or trailing tractor with sufficient horsepower, sufficient thrust to not only get that vehicle into the terminal and maintenance, but to push a disabled vehicle. So our horsepower ratings for these linear motors on the order of 900 horsepower apiece.
Also, if you said you had to thread the vehicle onto the guideway, if you had that swivel became disabled, I see that more of an issue that do you have a way to get that off? And also, how often do you have to have a power station to spacing on that?
Well, let me take the last question first. The distance between your substations is going to be a function of the number of vehicles that you're operating. So initially we would start with a substation every 10 miles. This is a DC-based system. Our power of choice is 1500 volt DC, and our initial substation spacing would be at 10 miles. We would make provisions to interject an additional substation to give us 5 miles between substations as our traffic levels approach full utilization. Okay? So we think we've got that covered from a power distribution standpoint. The first question relative to the rotating cargo bay. The rotating cargo bay is locked into place when it leaves the terminal. So it's locked into alignment with the tractors and the supporting cargo bay below that. It does not have an activation mechanism on board the vehicle. The activation mechanism for the cargo bay is at the dock side. And so you have an element at the dock that reaches out and grabs the cargo bay at the 2 points on opposite ends and opposite sides of the cargo bay and rotates it 30 degrees. Right? If you have a problem with the rotating cargo bay in a loading dock, you're not interfering with any other traffic or no other motion. So you can repair it at that location. We don't anticipate that as being a high-risk proposition.
Everybody, I'm sorry we have to wrap this up because I have to get some of you back to where you belong at the workplace. But before you go, I want to make sure that we have all of your email addresses so that we can email you the link. We are videotaping this presentation, and we'll have Dr. Roop's presentation on our Brown Bag Lunch website. So please be sure you do that before you leave. And we want to thank Dr. Roop for this fascinating topic.
Thank you.
I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about it. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Great questions. Great questions.